Gender whack-a-mole. Gender whack-a-mole is the term that was used by a member of President Trump's policy team in describing their work of late at a White House briefing that I recently attended. She was explaining that under the Obama administration, in every possible place, officials had reinterpreted sex and gender to mean anything someone wanted it to mean, whether in housing, hiring, homeless shelters, or schools. And this administration has to spend a lot of time knocking down those falsehoods and those false constructs and restoring true definitions and biological distinctions. Gender whack-a-mole also aptly summarizes what we've had to do a lot of this year as well. During the General Assembly session, we were whacking down outrageous bills on sex and gender as fast as they would pop up. With the newly elected delegates came California-style radical ideas. One of them being that Virginia must remove all references to gender in our code, including one where they wanted to take out the word woman before the word pregnant, as if anyone else could be pregnant. And others that sought to make illegal married housing at Liberty University because that institution believes in complementary genders in marriage. Since session concluded, and yes, it did finally conclude, it's been gender whack-a-mole at the local level. Fairfax led the charge by changing their school curriculum to teach children that gender is assigned at birth. Virginia Beach added its own flair with drag queen story time at their local library. And Henrico is busy holding mandatory teacher trainings to overcome gender bias. In every one of these places, the Family Foundation team is there to help organize and mobilize parents and churches that still believe in God's design, not just for marriage as complementary union, but also just for what it is to be male and female. This culture simply does not know what to do with gender. It desperately wants to pretend that gender is a manufactured social construct that is irrelevant to all facets of life, but also wants to enforce extreme conclusions based exclusively on gender, such as believe all women at all times, a concept that might be able to assist sexual assault victims in being heard, but cannot be universally applied without actual evidence to destroy a man's life and career. Thankfully, that presumption did not win today. I am thrilled to tell you, as we've been sitting here, Brett Kavanaugh has been sworn in to the U.S. Supreme Court. Liberals say that there should be no defining elements of what it is to be a woman, except the right to have an abortion. It wants to eliminate gender references while simultaneously dredging up the outdated, legally moot Equal Rights Amendment. Yes, the one you remember from 50 years ago. For me, it's the one I remember my grandmother talking about how she opposed years and years ago. While the amendment still brings the same valid concerns Phyllis Schlafly warned about back in the day, such as the right to taxpayer-funded abortion, in this modern era of confusion, it also brings new concerns. If equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged on account of sex, and the word sex means anything and nothing all at the exact same time, then such an amendment weaponizes government to interpret it any way they want. The Equal Rights Amendment enshrines into the U.S. Constitution that men have access to your daughter's school shower and the right to not be the only gender drafted at wartime. This gender confusion just highlights what is perhaps the greatest challenge of this era, the challenge of living in a postmodern, post-Christian age where there is no external source of truth, no shared construct of accepted norms. So words and biological realities are without shared meaning. As if explorers to a new land, many of us find ourselves entirely unable to even have conversations with others because there's just no shared language. And we wonder why incivility has come to earth-shattering decibels. While the full manifestations of a post-truth culture are recently coming to light, many have seen this coming for quite some time. Over a decade ago, Focus on the Family's Del Tackett came out with the Truth Project, a resource for thousands of churches and small groups across America. If you remember, the Family Foundation partnered with Focus on the Family to do some training. Many of you were a part of it and went and led the next generation. Can I just stop and say thank you for being ahead of your time and being part of educating the next generation on what is truth? But do you remember how Del defined truth in that project? Truth is reality as God sees it. Let me just repeat that. Truth is reality as God sees it. For decades, those who reject God's truth, his definition of reality, told us that there is no truth, that truth is relative, that we can make up our own truth. Now, after decades of a truthless culture, we can even redefine our own reality. No longer is reality determined by tangible, objective criteria like science. Reality is now defined by one's emotions and feelings. Culturally, the rejection of truth, particularly God's truth, proved devastating. In particular, the degradation of cultural institutions like the church and the family have been profound. Once viewed positively as having a redemptive cultural influence, the church in modern America is viewed as corrupt, irrelevant, or dangerous. The family, while very resilient, has suffered as well. But in today's America, this combination of decades of the denial of transcendent truth and the most recent denial of objective reality have grave implications. Over the past 2 weeks, we've seen some of the consequences of this play out before our very eyes in the confirmation process of Brett Kavanaugh. The rejection of the standards of law, such as due process or even a shred of objective evidence, being replaced by the subjective emotion of, I believe. But that's just a symptom. Deeper still is the left's desperate fear that the Supreme Court might once again begin to apply objective truth to the law. It's their fear that reality might once again be defined by objective truth, not by the subjective feelings of Anthony Kennedy. That terrifies them to the point of inciting violence against anyone who might believe in transcendent truth. You know, frightening, scary truths like male and female, he made them. At the Family Foundation, we know that holding fast to these eternal truths is profoundly important. More than just understanding them ourselves, we think it matters deeply that we encourage pastors to preach on them and give them the resources to guide those who might be struggling through this maze of confusion. That's why this year, we held a pastor summit to focus exclusively on matters of gender. Over 400 registered pastors got the chance to hear from Ryan Anderson, author of When Harry Became Sally, and Bruce Ashford, provost at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary.
So when we look at the frustration on our social media and our newspapers and on our friendships and on our relationships and in our own hearts, the only thing that can overcome all of that is the power of God.
People in your church who are struggling against same-sex attraction, they're feeling pulled apart between a church that says, I don't know what to do, I'm sorry, brother, that's got to be tough, and between the world that says, we know what to do, join us, the party just started. It's imperative that we remember the vitality, the importance of friendship.
It's been so exciting to be here and to talk with the pastors who are on the front line of this conversation. I'm really grateful that y'all put this together.
We have got to find a way for our churches to be safe places for people to open up with their sin. And so certainly we can begin to open up with sins that have less of a social stigma, and gender dysphoria as a way of encouraging people who have something like gender dysphoria of opening up about their own struggles. Our dispositional response to somebody who's been vulnerable enough to unearth something that is so sort of stigmatized and painful and disorienting is to hug them, look them in the eye and say, listen, Jesus loves you most importantly, but we love you too.
That's what we really need in the church, is we need to have an understanding of how do we react when someone comes to us and says, I'm dealing with same-sex attraction, or I'm dealing with some confusion in this area. This conference was really helpful in giving us practical examples of this is how you walk someone through that journey.
To take an approach with kindness, with sensitivity, knowing that the people in their struggles has the imago Dei, the image of God.
Well, just providing a resource like this, or they're bringing in speakers who understand these things, who come from the other side of it, and helping us to be able to see things that we couldn't see on our own because of just not being exposed to it, not being aware of it.
Family Foundation has given us the right advice we need as believers and as Christians.
And just bringing attention to legislation, policy, changes, things that would affect us as a community that we may not always be aware of.
Well, I just love to know that there's people like you guys that are working on this. You can help represent us, and it's something that we can also help to support and get behind.
Definitely, Family Foundation is doing an awesome job to help us, the local pastor here in Virginia.
In the overwhelmingly positive feedback, what we heard most was that pastors walked away inspired by Rosaria Butterfield's personal testimony of finding Jesus in a world of false realities. Her story of going from a lesbian activist to a married mother of 4. Do you know what her word was to these pastors? She sees revival around the corner. Do you want to know why? To quote her, I think revival is just around the corner. Our churches need to be ready for what happens when people like me are betrayed by the gay rights movement. Are you ready for the refugees? Because they are coming. Every generation has its unique challenges. While they are never small, neither are they insurmountable. Those who study history get the benefit of understanding where they fit in a long line of heroes who have met these challenges head on and paved the way for a brighter future. Well, I can't tell you what's in my high school yearbook, and I can't tell you what I was doing in the summer of 1982. I can tell you what is in my undergraduate thesis, although here in Virginia, as you know, these theses have a way of making their way into gubernatorial campaigns. But since I'm not planning to run, I think I can share that with you. In a study of the Clapham sect, the group of people that surrounded William Wilberforce seeking to abolish slavery, I concluded that people of faith, not just any faith, but evangelical faith, are uniquely situated to lead others to overcome their cultural injustices of their generation. It is by our faith that we understand all of human history as one story. It's not a disjointed, non-thematic collection of events. It's his story. The story of mankind in need of a savior, the story of a creator working to restore his creation. That perspective gives us the long view. It allows us to see God work over time. It gives us patience in the trial. If the Israelites had to wander for 40 years before getting to see the promised land, so might we. If Abraham and Sarah had to wait 25 years before their blessed promise won, so might we. Christians are also uniquely fit to lead societies out of darkness because by virtue of our faith, we have an unmovable, unshakable hope. While others can be hopeful at times, few can be hopeful in all times. We are told the end of the story, so we don't have to be lost in the middle. If you've ever read the end of a book to be comfortable in those middle pages, you understand what I'm talking about. This unshakable, unmovable hope comes from knowing that God is in control, even when it looks like evil prevails. Unlike many other religions, our God is a God who numbers the hairs on our head and listens to our prayers. When we look at history, God is always redeeming, restoring, and resurrecting. That's his creative work. And if that is his character and his activity, and we are his image bearers, it should be our character and our activity. When we start to feel hopeless or hold a belief in the secret places of our heart that it all goes bad at the end, so why does it matter anyway? We are failing to do what he has asked us to do. We are missing our opportunity to reflect God's glory to a non-believing world through acts of redemption, restoration, and resurrection. Furthermore, we're missing our ability to share the hope that we have. The Family Foundation exists to be part of God's redemptive work. Rather than looking around and saying that politics is corrupt and culture is beyond repair, we look around and we see broken families that God can restore, individual confusion that God can overcome, and a commonwealth and a nation that God can still resurrect to be a shining light on the hill for all the world to see. It means the darker it gets, the greater the opportunity for God's redemptive work through us. If you've ever watched It's a Wonderful Life and seen how Bedford Falls would have been Pottersville if not for George Bailey, you can begin to imagine Virginia being Liberalville without the Family Foundation. And by that, when I talk about the Family Foundation, I want to be very clear. What I mean by that is every one of you who have been a part of supporting this organization for the last 33 years, who have supported us financially, who have worked to talk to your legislator, who have been a part of this change that we have made here in Virginia. But without the Family Foundation, I can honestly, confidently say we would not have over 3,000 underprivileged children getting the education they need through a scholarship from our school choice program. Without the Family Foundation, faith-based adoption providers who make up 60% of the child placements might have had to shut down rather than been forced to adopt a child into a home that they did not believe was best for that child. Without the Family Foundation, thousands upon thousands more children would have been victims of abortion because their mom would not have had 24 hours to think about it, maybe a parent to help them guide that difficult decision, or the chance to see their unborn baby boy or girl in an ultrasound. Those are tangible human results of policy decisions we have all helped influence. Those are tangible lives that have been changed or saved. So tonight, I ask the question, what are we doing to ensure that there will never be a day where some future generation looks back and says, I wish we still had the Family Foundation? I'm excited to announce to you that the Family Foundation is taking a huge step of faith to ensure that our impact is permanent. We are taking a huge step of faith to ensure that our impact is never diminished by those who want to see us maligned. Years ago, Walt Barbie took a step of faith to join with others and form the Family Foundation in the basement of his home. From there to an office building in Northern Virginia, and during session functioning out of the trunk of his car and a coat rack in a General Assembly office, finally realizing that if they were going to be successful, their full-time office had to be in Richmond, setting up shop across the river and in a vault in the basement of Old City Hall. We then moved to our current location in the SunTrust building with a tremendous view of the Capitol. Over the past decade or so, though, we have begun to consider the financial implications of continuing to be at the mercy of landlords and rent increases. More recently, we've wondered if there will ever be a time when no one will be willing to rent to an organization such as ours. The open hostility to our principles is becoming more threatening, and pressure on businesses to drive out Christians or those who share our values from Christians and communities is growing. From businesses and communities is growing. While you may realize that secular culture confronts us when we step outside our building, you may not realize that hostility can permeate even the walls of our offices, from vendors to other building tenants and potentially building management. I am happy to announce, through God's provision, we will no longer have that concern. In just over a month, we will close on the purchase of the historic Stuart Lee House, just steps away from Capitol Square, the state Supreme Court, and downtown Richmond. I cannot wait to talk to each one of you in the coming weeks and months about the specifics of this decision. I want to tell you every God story about how he placed this opportunity in our path and worked through so many details to get us to this purchase. In the coming weeks and months, there will be a great deal of work and investment to bring this beautiful home into the condition it needs to become our permanent home. But it is work and investment that I and the board of directors at the Family Foundation believe is not only prudent, but necessary. I often think of Walt and his dream and wonder if we fulfilled all that he envisioned. I believe with this purchase, we've taken the next step to ensure that Walt's vision never, ever goes away. Truth is permanent. It doesn't change. It just is. The Family Foundation has existed for more than 30 years to champion God's truths in the public arena. There are those who certainly wish we'd go away, wish we'd stop talking about these issues, wish we'd ignore their actions or quiet our voices. You and I know we can't do that. We won't do that. And as long as God provides and brings people like you and our tremendous staff to do this work, we aren't going anywhere. Thank you.